Hello South Africa and welcome to another informative episode of The Loading Zone. My name is Rebound Nameng, your financial advisor. Thank you for tuning in to episode 5 and I hope that you all spoiled your mothers yesterday. Happy belated Mother's Day to all the mothers and a special shout out to my mother. I love you, my queen, and thank you for being the world's greatest mom and for your unconditional love and support. Before we go any further, please note that anything said on these videos do not constitute financial advice and should therefore not be seen or treated as such. For adequate advice, please seek the help of a registered financial advisor or hit me up in my professional capacity. I'd like to think I'm good at what I do. As discussed in last week's episode, today is part 2 of 6 where we will be talking about asset classes. So as you know, last week we touched on cash and the second asset class we'll be discussing today is bonds. Bonds are essentially loans. You just happen to be on the other side of the loan as an investor, lending money to the bond issuer. It's just the way that the bond issuer utilizes to raise money or capital. Governments as well as corporations use bonds as alternatives to increasing taxes in the case of a government and as an alternative to issuing shares in the case of a corporation. Let's look at an example. Perhaps they don't have the funds to fully fund this operation and they basically issue out bonds to raise capital. As an investor, you essentially lend them money for a fixed period and they promise to pay you back a specific amount after a specific period. It's an IOU, so to say. Imagine that. The government owing you money. Wow. So anyway, that's basically how it's structured. Bonds are rated by rating agencies. You know how there's always a big hoo-ha about rating agencies whenever they give us as a country a poor rating. Well, these ratings are, in simple terms, a way to put the bond issuer within a certain band of risk. This would mean if rating agencies view you as a country as a high risk, the likelihood of you getting funding is less. People tend to become skeptical to invest with you. I mean, think of it this way. If a friend wants to borrow money, but you know he has a gambling problem, would you lend them that money? Okay, maybe a gambling habit is not the best examples, but you get what I'm trying to say. In most cases, you'll find that a government bond would have a higher or better credit rating than companies. So this means they will carry the least amount of risk, which would also mean that they would generally have the lowest interest rate. The higher the risk rating, the lower the interest rate. A high interest rating in this instance means everything's good. So with every asset class, this is what will always happen. The lower the risk, the lower the potential return. And the higher the risk, the higher the potential return. I know I've mentioned this last week, but I will say it again. There is no such thing as a risk-free investment. Also, the interest one gets in bonds is also taxable. Just like it is in interest in any cash instrument, you will be taxed at your marginal tax rate. Bonds also have an inverse relationship with interest rates. Inverse means opposite. What this basically means is declining interest rates increase bond prices and ultimately bond yields fall. Conversely, increasing interest rates cause bond prices to fall and bond yields to rise. I hope I haven't lost you anyway. If I did, just rewind the video a bit. Sometimes it gets better when you hear it the second time. All that's really important to understand is that when you lend money to an institution, and they promise that they will pay you back what you gave them, plus a predetermined extranyana after the term. So let's talk about the different types of bonds. So with corporate bonds, here you essentially lending money to a company. You usually get a better return here than you would if you were lending money to the state, for instance. Corporate bonds can be further broken down into convertible bonds, investment grade bonds, senior secure, senior unsecured bonds, as well as high yield bonds or subordinated bonds, etc. But let's not complicate things and just leave it right there. Corporate bonds are essentially you lending to a company. A fixed rate bond is a bond that pays the same level of interest over its entire term. Long-term fixed rate bonds pay a higher yield than short-term fixed rate bonds. Municipality bonds are bonds that are issued by municipalities or cities. These are issued for the purpose of building roads, schools, or any other project for that matter. You usually get interest payments twice a year. Government bonds are issued by the central government. So the difference between government bonds and municipality bonds is simply the level at which they are issued. Municipality bonds are issued by local authorities for funding local affairs, and government bonds are basically on a bigger scale. Now, agency bonds are issued by government agencies or government-funded agencies. Think BO, Eskom, Transnet, and so forth. Bonds are regarded as relatively safe investments, but they too have a certain level of risk. The interest received in bonds are typically better than that you would find or would earn in cash. They create some form of stability on any balanced portfolio, which we'll touch on after discussing all the different asset classes. They are ideal investments for people not looking for that kind of volatility that one gets in the higher yielding asset classes. They offer an alternative to the typical cash instrument. Again, speak to a financial advisor whenever you need to make an investment decision. Advice is always free. Implementation, on the other hand, depending on what you're doing, that's where you start paying. With that said, thanks for tuning in. Please like and share with your friends and family, and subscribe as well. Please, man, just do it. That's it for this week. Have a blessed and productive week ahead. Let's get loaded.